And as Steve mentioned, today I'm going to be talking about how to speed up your Joomla. And before I begin to talk about how to practically do that, I would like to say a few words about myself and why speeding up your website is really important. So my name is Daniel. I've been working for Joomla websites and other agencies 7 years ago, and after that I joined SiteGround, and I've been with SiteGround for the last 5 years now. I love traveling the world, and I'm also addicted to extreme sports. And there's something really important about extreme sports that's also very important for your website, and that's speed. Like, for example, if you're a skateboarder, you need speed in order to make some tricks. And the same is pretty much valid for your Joomla website. So speed is important due to the following things. So speed affects your Google rankings. And if your website is slow, then Google, Yahoo, Bing, and all of the other search engines will not rank your website properly, and you will be found on the second or the third page of the results. And that's not something you want. Of course, at the same time, your visitors, your readers, if you have, for example, an online magazine, will be happy if your website is fast. They will be able to browse through it, see the content, and interact with the website. And we live in a fast-moving age, which makes us not tolerant about small things. And that's why if I open a website and it doesn't load for maximum 2 to 2.5 seconds, I'll probably just close the tab and go to the other results in Google. So one other thing that's really important is that if your website is fast enough, the server that hosts the website will be able to handle more visitors, which means that you will have to pay less for hosting, and this also means that the server will be able to handle the visitors without any issues. If your website is slow, then the server may be overloaded, and even visitors that have existing accounts will probably be affected, and they may quit your website. They may decide not to pay for their accounts if, for example, you have an online shop built on Joomla. So how to make your Joomla website faster? A faster Joomla website is building it considering optimizing every single aspect of the website. And that's not very difficult. I mean that it's not rocket science. You have to know some of the special configurations that Joomla offers and some server technologies that may be able to help you. But it's not something super complicated. And I have divided my presentation in 2 parts. The first one is how to configure Joomla and how to take advantage of some of the features that it offers in order to speed up your website. And the second one, which is a little bit more complicated, is how to configure your server or how to choose a web hosting provider that offers some advanced technologies that will speed on server level. So before I start with the application level optimizations, or that is the first part of the presentation, I would just mention some general guidelines about speeding up your website. The first thing that you have to do is to always keep your Joomla updated, because with every single release, Joomla becomes faster and faster, and developers that write code for the core of the platform care about speed, and they constantly improve the code and the SQL queries that are made to the database. So that's something you really have to consider. The second thing is that nobody uses just the Joomla core. Most of the people use extensions, and you have to choose extensions wisely. When you select an extension, always check the reviews and see if people have experienced issues with that extension, or if it works out of the box with the latest version of Joomla. My personal advice is to avoid extensions that are not compatible with the latest version of Joomla, because that usually indicates that the developer is not familiar with the Joomla platform, or the developer doesn't have enough time to patch the code. Something that's also really useful in order to speed up your website is to deactivate unused extensions and upgrade the ones that you do use. And that's important because if you install like 30 or 40 extensions and you just need 5 of them, the rest are not needed. They just make queries to the database, even if they are not on your homepage. So if you open the administrator part of the site and it's slow, probably that's because you have extensions you are not using. The last thing that is important is to simplify your templates as much as possible. And if you have some fancy stuff on your front page, then you really have to consider if it should be there. Like if your website is about your own bakery, you probably don't need a weather extension on the front page because people won't use it. People will get to your website in order to check your products, information about your company, find where the bakery is, and it's not logical to put an extension that people won't use. And in addition, it will increase the loading time of your website. You have to also remove unnecessary large images, because if you put an image that is 4 megabytes on your front page, then the browser that will open the website will download the whole image. And that's a slow process, especially for people that are using mobile devices or they are connected to a slow internet service provider. And you really have to optimize the images and even make your website responsive so that some big images will not be displayed at all if your website is open through an iPhone, on an Android device, or even a tablet. 2 other things that you have to consider, but of course they are not obligatory, is to use fewer internal and external links on your website, because if you have like 300 links to other pages, then the browser will try to parse all the links and load them in the HTML that's generated, and that's not really fast. If you really have to provide many links to other pages, consider adding a sitemap of your website. So you will have just your main menu, and after that you may just place a button or a link to your sitemap so that users will be able to see the whole structure of the website, and the sitemap will be useful for them instead of navigating every single page one at a time. A really important thing that caused issues on many occasions for people is to avoid loading content from remote servers. If you need to load content, for example, from an API, from a remote server, or you need to just incorporate some text from an article that someone published on his website, then you really have to make it on specific pages and not on your front page if it is possible. Because if the remote server is not available, then your Joomla application will try to load the content again and again and again, and eventually it will fail. But during this period, it will not load the whole homepage of your site. And this means that your site may load for just 1 second, but if the remote server is not available, then the whole site will be delayed and will be loaded, like, for example, 5 seconds. Okay, so let's go straight to the application level optimization part of the presentation. And the first thing that I would like to talk about is compression. So compression is something that will speed up immensely your website because it will simply decrease the size of the content that your Firefox browser or your Chrome browser will have to get from the server and display on your end. You can think of compression in terms of the Joomla application the same way you will think of compressing, for example, 4 text documents on your computer and sending them to one of your friends. So you won't have to send all of the documents. You may just create a single backup archive, and after that send the compressed archive to someone, and after that the recipient simply has to extract the documents and see them on his or her computer. With your Joomla website, if you enable compression, then the size of the whole website will be shrinked, and the users will be able to download your CSS files, your JavaScript, and the whole HTML faster. So 2 things here to consider. The first one is that compression is natively supported by Joomla, and you need no extensions whatsoever. You just need to enable compression. And to do that, you may go to Site, Global Configuration, Server. That's in the administrator part of your website. And as you see on the screenshot, there is an option called gzip page compression. So you just have to change this option and enable it, and after that, save the configuration. When you do that, the Joomla application will use certain PHP code to compress the output and deliver it to the client. So there is also another type of compression that does the same thing, but it's kind of faster. And it is faster because it is on a server level. The compression is actually handled by the web server, the Apache web server, or Nginx if you're using. So the other type of compression is handled by the server, and it may be enabled by simply adding some rules to your htaccess. And I will just show you the rules in a few minutes. The other thing that you have to consider is to enable caching for your Joomla application. So what's caching? When you open your website, the HTML page that is generated is pretty much dynamically generated, which means that the Joomla application connects to the database, after that gets the text for a certain article or a product that you're selling through your website, and it generates the whole HTML page. And if you enable the Joomla caching, which is also natively supported, you don't need any extensions, then Joomla will create a single file that will cache the information. And the next time someone opens the same page, Joomla will not query the database, but it will actually load the content from the cached file that it has saved on the server. Let me just go back to the previous slide. To enable caching, you have to go to the plugin manager in the administrator section of your site, find the system cache plugin, and just click the enable button, which is in the status column. And here are the recommended cache settings for your Joomla application. I would say always to use conservative caching, because there are two types of caching. Conservative caching, which is the old type of caching, but it is way faster than the new one. And also use the file cache handler, which means that your Joomla application will create a folder. The name of the folder will be cache, and inside this folder, it will create separate files that will contain the HTML pages that have been cached. So pretty much that's it. The rest of the things can be left as they are. You don't need to change the cache time or the session settings. That's everything. And as I've mentioned, you may also add some code to your .htaccess file on your server in order to enable the compression handled by the web server. And to do that, you just have to open your .htaccess file through a file manager, or download it through FTP, edit it with Notepad or another text editor, and after that, upload it back to your server. The only requirement here is to use Apache and to have a compression module enabled on the Apache server, which is mod deflate or mod gzip. That depends on the version of the Apache server. But that's pretty much standard practice, and all the web hosting providers support these modules. So the code that I'm about to show you should work on all of the major web hosting providers. Don't worry about the link. At the end of the presentation, I'll give you a link to the presentation, so don't try to write it down. You may just copy-paste it after that. So how it works. Here is the htaccess magical code. If you add that code to your htaccess, then it will instruct your visitors, browsers, to cache certain elements of your website for a certain amount of time. As you can see here, there are several different lines, and for example, the fifth one shows that CSS resources, that these are your cascading sheet styles, should be cached for 1 week. And that means that if your Firefox browser opens the website and you have 5 CSS files, the browser will copy the code in these files and save it locally on your computer. So the next time the browser opens the same website, it will not download the CSS files again from the server, but it will load them from your local browser's cache. And that's useful because the browser will not make a connection to the server, and the website will load much faster. So more optimizations that you can do are to resize your images. As I mentioned, there is no need to upload 5 megabyte, 6 megabyte images to your website because they will load very slowly for people with slow connection and for people on mobile devices. So always resize your images. If you need a smaller image, just make it smaller. Do not use the HTML code for just resizing the image because the image is still the same size. Smush your images. What smushing is, it pretty much gets, smushing is a technique to get an image, optimize it, so the quality of the image will remain the same, but the size of the image will be much smaller. And I'll show you how to do that with an easy online tool. And the other two things that you may do, but they are not natively supported by Joomla, are to minify and combine CSS and JavaScript files, and to also use image sprites. Minification of CSS files is something useful because if you have a complex template and the template needs, for example, like 20 or 15 CSS files and JavaScript files, then when you combine the code, you get only one CSS file, and then this CSS file will be downloaded by your browser. So the browser will make fewer HTTP requests to the server, and the website will be rendered faster. Okay, that sounds nice, but how do you do that? Joomla does not support it natively, so you have to use other tools to do that. And the first tool that's really popular, and it's really easy to do it, is called Smushit. It's a website, and it's part of Yahoo's project for optimization. How it works, you just upload an image through a web-based interface, and the interface will simply generate a new image that will be the same quality, but at the same time will be smaller in size. In order to resize all of your images locally before you upload them to your Joomla website, I would like to say that the best two tools that I use are Adobe Photoshop or Fireworks. You may also use Paint, of course, but it's not that easy, and Photoshop allows you to resize like thousands, hundreds of images at the same time. And the last thing that you may consider is to use Joomla extensions in order to minify and combine your CSS code. So here on this slide, I have listed some of the most highly rated extensions on the Joomla extensions directory. But before I talk about the first one, which is JCH Optimize, I would like to warn you that using extensions to minify CSS code and JavaScript code and to also use image sprites may not always work for your website. So you always have to test. If you have a complex website with a custom template and several extensions such as K2, VirtueMart, or something similar, you should always test every single extension that you are using. And JCH Optimize may not work in your case, but you may test some of the others. I've tested JCH Optimize on several websites, and I would like to say that most of the time it works out of the box, but it depends, and you really have to test. So JCH Optimized could be installed by downloading it from the extensions directory, and after that installing it, or you may use the new feature that Joomla provides, and it's called Install from Web, which means that you may directly install the extension without manually downloading it before that. So once you download and install the extension, you just have to enable it the same way we enabled the caching plugin. And after that, these are the settings that you should use. Most of these settings are the default settings, and you don't really have to change anything. So once you install it, just make sure that the settings you see on this slide are absolutely the same on your website. And once you do that, you have to just check your website. If it loads properly, if you see all of the elements, if the CSS works and the JavaScript works, then you may use JCH Optimize as long as there are no issues. So the next thing that I would like to talk about is called Google Mod Page Speed. So Google developed a module for the Apache web server, and I think that right now it's also available for Windows servers. And what this module does is it combines CSS code, JavaScript code, and all the things that I mentioned, but it does that on a server level. So it is something that works not only for Joomla websites, but also for Drupal websites and for all other types of applications. And if your server has this module, then you don't need to install JCH Optimize. You don't need to manually make all the changes that I mentioned. You may just use mod page speed. But the issue here is that most of the shared hosting providers do not support this module because on shared servers, it takes a lot of configuration to make the module work for all of the users hosted on a single server. If you're a SiteGround customer, we have this module by default on our servers, so you may use it. And as I've said, if you manage your own server, then it's really a good option, and you should consider installing mod page speed in order to achieve better results when you load your website. So once you do that, once you configure your website to use compression and caching, and after that you install a separate plugin that will be able to allow you to compress and minify your CSS and JavaScript resources, the most important thing is to check how's your website doing. So you really have to check the results. And a good idea is to also check the results before you make any optimizations. So you have a baseline, and after that you will be able to compare the results. And those three tools that I've added on this slide allow you to do exactly that. You may access any of them, and they will show you for how many seconds your website loads. They will also show you if you need to optimize a certain part of the website, like for example, if you have too many resources loaded from other servers, or if, for example, you have too many redirects, because redirects also affect the loading speed. And pretty much those three tools are everything you need in order to see if you're doing a great job optimizing your website. So some results here. I've installed a default Joomla 3.3 application, and as you can see here, without any optimizations, the page load time is about 1.6 seconds, and the size of the page is 500 kilobytes, so that's not too much, but this is a default application, and the number of requests that the browser made in order to load the page are 35. So after that, I enabled cache and compression. After that, I also added the htaccess rules, and finally, I installed the JCH Optimize plugin. And as you can see, the final result is that the website became 60% faster, which means that it will be able to handle 60% more visitors. And of course, that's important, because if you have thousands of visitors and your website is regularly overloaded, then the same server, once your website is optimized, will be able to handle more visitors. Of course, people do not use the default Joomla. They always install templates, extensions, and change some of the default settings. And this test is not really accurate. So at the end of the presentation, I'll show you the same test, but with a real website, a website that uses heavily customized template, VirtueMart, and K2. So you will see how fast a Joomla website may become if you properly optimize the site and also the server that hosts the Joomla website. So the next thing, the second part of the presentation is dedicated to server level optimizations. So servers that host Joomla websites should also be properly configured in order to squeeze the maximum optimization for your Joomla website. So you can't really just have one server with default Linux distribution like Ubuntu or CentOS and believe that this server will be able to handle thousands of requests to your Joomla website. So a Joomla website is just a PHP MySQL application. And if you properly optimize your PHP and the MySQL setup, then you will be able to have a Joomla website that works much faster than just a default distribution of Linux or Windows. So the first thing that I would like to talk about is CDN. So what exactly is CDN? CDN is a content delivery network. And how it works is that if you have your website hosted in the United States, let's say in Chicago or in Europe, and you have a visitor from Australia or Japan, then if CDN is enabled, your visitor will load the website content from the nearest server to the location of the visitor. If CDN is not enabled, then the visitor has to connect all the way to the data center in Chicago and download all of the resources. And what CDN does for you, it pretty much distributes some of your website's resources all over the world. And your CSS files, images, JavaScript, or some static content will be copied to multiple servers around the world. The content will be copied on servers in Asia, Australia, Africa. So all the people that want to load your website will practically get the resources from the nearest server. And that's really something amazing, because your server will also have to handle fewer requests, and that allows the server to handle more visitors. The other thing that CDN does for you, and it depends on the CDN provider, but most of the CDN providers out there also block malicious requests to your website. So a CDN provider usually handles terabytes of traffic every hour and every day. So usually they have access to big data, and they can analyze the requests and see if the requests are malicious. So this way, they may be able to block malicious attacks, denial of service attacks to your website. And I do advise everyone to use CDN for their website. One of the great plugins for Joomla that I didn't mention in the presentation is the CDN plugin by No Number by Peter. It's really easy to set it up, so you just have to install it, and after that choose a CDN provider, and that's it. On our servers, people may use the Cloudflare service for free, so if you're a SiteGround customer, you just have to click a few buttons, and after that your Joomla website will be automatically configured to use Cloudflare. As I've said, CDN will make your website faster, but it will also avoid overloads on your server. And one of the other things is that Google and Bing have algorithms that check if your website uses a CDN. And if they find that it does use a CDN, then they will rank your website better in the search results. Some software tweaks that seem really complicated, but they really are not. And if you're a professional developer and system administrator, you will know what I'm talking about. Other than that, I'll just mention the optimizations and the tweaks, and the next time you talk to your hosting provider, just ask them if they use a similar setup or they know what you're talking about, so you pretty much get a clear picture if they know what they're doing. So the first thing is to use a fast and secure PHP handler like FastCGI. FastCGI is probably one of the fastest implementations. The other one is PHP FPM, but it is a little bit more complicated to set it up. So moving PHP binaries into the memory. Usually when you execute a PHP script, the PHP binary that executes the script is saved on a hard drive somewhere. It doesn't matter if the hard drive is mechanical, HDD, or a flash-based disk. Memory is thousands of times faster than hard drives. And if you need to execute something, it better be in memory than stored on a hard drive. Temporary directories, such as the server's TMP directory, should also be moved to the memory because it's way faster. And of course, MySQL query cache and MySQL TMP should also be moved to the RAM. This way, MySQL queries will be executed much faster. And if you have a really complicated query that takes for about 4 or 5 seconds to be completed, then if you use this setup, the query will take no more than 1 to 2 seconds. Okay, so let's go on. Some of the methods that really optimize the Joomla website, they really optimize any type of PHP MySQL website, are PHP Opcode and object caching. And in order to explain better what I'm talking about, I'll just show you how a Joomla website interacts with a simple MySQL database. So let's say that you have your new nice website and you sell bikes online. And let's say that you get a new visitor, and this visitor is looking for spare parts for his bicycle. So once the visitor opens the website, the visitor goes directly to the search functionality and types, for example, some random parts. What happens is that the visitor connects to the Joomla application. The Joomla application after that connects to the MySQL database, and it checks many tables for the exact search criteria that the user specified. Once the database has the results, it gives the results to the Joomla application, and the Joomla application generates the final search results page. So your visitor simply sees an HTML page with the results of the search. And that happens every time someone searches for a product on your website. And as a matter of fact, it also happens every time someone opens an article or a menu item. So when you have memcached, which is the so-called object caching, when the visitor makes the search, then before the results are returned to the visitor, the same results, or as we call it, objects, are also stored into the memcached server. And that's really useful, because if you get a similar request that pretty much needs the same information, then all consecutive requests will be forwarded to the memcached server, and the database will not be queried at all, which means that the MySQL will not be queried, and if you do that, the load on the server will be drastically decreased. So the next thing is opcode caching, and in order to explain how it works, I'll explain how PHP works. So when you execute a PHP script, what happens is that the server needs to execute the script, and once it executes the script, it goes through several different stages, and these stages are obligatory. Pretty much computers and servers understand only the result of the execution, which is opcode. Opcode is something like binary code. It is pretty much the same. So in order for a server to execute your script, it has to transform the PHP code that the developers understand into opcode. And the opcode to be generated, then the PHP script has to go through lexing, scanning, parsing, compilation, and finally you get the opcode. So that's slow. That's really slow because, for example, a huge library that includes thousands of files, every time a PHP script is executed, you compile one and the same code. And the code doesn't change so often. Like, for example, you will have a new version of Joomla after 3 months or after 4 months. And in the meantime, your server is executing and compilating one and the same code every time. So the idea of opcode caching is to cache only the opcode because it doesn't change. And once it is cached into the memory, the Joomla will simply execute this opcode, and the server will not have to go through the different stages every time the website is executed. So that's pretty much about PHP MySQL. And right now, I'll briefly discuss a very popular topic, and it's called reverse proxy servers. Reverse proxy servers are used to handle huge amount of traffic. And some of the popular websites that use reverse proxy servers are Twitter, Facebook, pretty much all of the social websites that you can think of, and also some of Google services are also using reverse proxy servers. I'll briefly explain the idea of proxy servers so that you may be able to ask your web hosting provider if they use reverse proxy servers and how Joomla can take advantage of that. So reverse proxy servers are used to decrease the load on your server. So what happens if you have your dedicated server or if you're hosted on a shared server and you have thousands of simultaneous requests. Then the server should be able to pretty much handle every single user without making the other visitors wait for the content to be generated. And that's pretty much impossible for websites that are super popular. If you get like Twitter or Facebook, then you know that their content, their whole platform is distributed on many servers. But that's something very difficult to achieve. And reverse proxy servers allow regular users to achieve similar results in a different way. So every time someone opens your website, the server that hosts your Joomla application has to find all the bits of information like images, CSS files, JavaScript files, and other files, and after that generate the HTML content. And the browser simply loads this HTML content, nothing much. So that happens every time a single page is accessed. And what reverse proxy servers do, they sit between the visitors and your server, and then they cache this HTML output. So this means that if some visitors request a page that has been already delivered to another visitor, then the reverse proxy server will handle the request instead of the server, and this will not cause overload issues. And that's cool because your origin server is not overloaded. The origin server doesn't handle the requests at all. The problem is that reverse proxy servers and Joomla do not get well together because Joomla doesn't support reverse proxy servers out of the box. And the problem is that content should be invalidated. Suppose that you have an article, and this article has been updated. But what you're doing is that you're actually updating the article on the origin server, and the reverse proxy server is not aware of that. So if a new visitor opens this page and it is in the cache of the reverse proxy server, then the visitor will see outdated content. So the good thing that has to be done here is to configure your Joomla application to invalidate content. So the Joomla application has to connect to the reverse proxy server and instruct the reverse proxy server that the certain post or the certain element or the certain product in your online shop is no longer the same and it should be removed from the cache. The bad thing is that Joomla doesn't support that, and it's really difficult to configure it because you need to hire a developer or a system administrator which should be able to write a plugin for you that will do the exact same thing, and the developer should also be able to configure the reverse proxy server to work with your specific Joomla application. So, of course, there is a solution, and we offer custom caching, for example, on our servers, and I would like to briefly describe our solution. It offers custom PHP MySQL configuration. It offers memcached and APC caching, and we've managed to develop a reverse proxy friendly setup for Joomla websites on our servers. It took us about 1 year to do it. But we're really proud of it because it works with 90–95% of all the Joomla websites out there. So if your website is really popular and a single server cannot handle the load, then a reverse proxy server may be the solution. And if you really want to know more about it, the two most popular technologies out there that people use, and we also use, are Varnish, that's the name of the first reverse proxy technology that's really popular, and the other one is called Nginx. So pretty much if you're interested into that, you may check our offer, and you may also check the internet for information how to set it up if you want to do it yourself. So final results with all the optimizations that I mentioned, the application level optimizations and the CDN optimizations. As you can see, a real website that uses Joomla plus VirtueMart and plus a custom template and extensions used to load for 5.2 seconds. And once I optimized this website and configured it to use a reverse proxy, opcode, and object caching, the website loaded for just 1 second. So that's 500%. That's 500% improvement. And this means that your server will be able to handle 500% more visitors, which is pretty much amazing. And of course, Google and all the other search engines and your visitors will be happier because the website will work faster and smoother, and they won't have to wait for a single page to load for 5 seconds. Some key takes that are really important is that speed optimization is a process. It is not something that you will do today, and after that, you won't have to consider it anymore. So do it regularly. Always test your results and compare to your baseline that you have created when you first tested the website, and choose a web-optimized host. We believe that web hosting providers should not simply install a Linux distribution and after that put Joomla on top of it. That's not the way to optimize. That's not the correct way to optimize the server for Joomla. So every time you need to host a new project, ask your web hosting provider, no matter which is the hosting provider, what are they doing specifically for Joomla? Do they have an optimized Joomla solution? Do they offer reverse proxy caching? Do they have PHP Opcode Caching? And so on. And you pretty much get the idea if the web hosting provider knows their stuff or they're just the next web hosting provider that you have to leave. Pretty much that's it. Right now it's questions time. And before we start answering the questions, I just want to say thank you. And you may get the slides from my SlideShare profile. Steve, I know that I needed a little bit more than 40 minutes, and if we have the time, I'll answer some of the questions. If not, here's my email, and people feel free to just ask me any questions or send me an email.
Great, thank you, Daniel. Do you mind going back to the slide link? We did have a couple of requests.
Yes, of course.
Great, thank you.
Here it is.
So, yeah, we've got about 10 minutes for some questions, and we had quite a few.
Awesome.
One that came up quite frequently was, how do you make these optimizations work with your development process? So if you're building a site, it can be difficult to do that if you have caching and gzipping and so on turned on. And
yeah, of course. My personal advice is to disable all types of caching while you are developing. And once you have the first version of the website, then move this first version to a separate subdomain or whatever. And after that, configure this subdomain to use all of the caching layers and gzip compression and everything that I mentioned. Show it to your client and discuss some of the features and the speed of the website with the client. And after that, you may continue developing the site on the original development environment.
Cool. Next question. Can you talk about a little bit more about mod page speed, particularly when it comes to SiteGround? What kind of effects have you seen with users adding mod page speed?
It is a good question because mod page speed is used not only by Joomla but also by other platforms, as I mentioned. And the statistics show that on our servers, about 20, probably 30% of the people that use caching enable mod page speed. So I would say that it works great for optimization, and the performance increase that it gives is about between 30 and 45%. So if your website loads for 4 seconds and you enable mod page speed, then 40% less is about second and a half. So this means it is a very good solution. The bad thing about mod page speed on our servers is that it is not compatible with our SUPERCACHER and the reverse proxy setup that we offer. So you either have to choose if you're going to use mod page speed, or you either have to choose, or you will be using our varnish-based reverse proxy setup. And I would like to say that it depends on your website. Because, as I've mentioned, we've managed to configure our SUPERCACHER to work with 90–95% of the website, but sometimes there are some HTML blocks that are Ajax based, and there are some sessions and cookies that we cannot really cache with a reverse proxy. So if that's the case, then I would advise users to use the mod page speed module.
And a similar question about CDNs. Do you have any statistics, or do you have any personal experience with how much faster a CDN makes your website? What kind of an impact does it have?
Yeah, I do. It depends mainly on how many static resources do you have in your website, because CDN does not work for the whole HTML output. CDN will distribute just the images, the CSS files, and the JavaScript files on servers around the world. But if you have a new page article on your website, then CDN cannot really know about this page, and the same page will be downloaded from the origin server. But for example, if your website is 30% static content, then you will get about between 25 and 35% increase. Pretty much it is equal the number of resources that you have that are static. So if you have a lot of images, for example, a website about photography, then it's a really good idea to enable CDN. And one of the other important things that CDN provides is security. So it's not only about speed.
One question about mod page speed was, does this replace any of the other optimizations?
You may use mod page speed, and it will replace the compression offered by the web server. It may also be used as a replacement for the JCH Optimize plugin, because it does the same. It will compress the CSS JavaScript code. It will also minify it. But mod page speed cannot be used as a replacement for PHP Opcode Caching, for example. It also cannot be used as a replacement for reverse proxies, and it certainly will not replace MySQL caching. So for all of the application level optimizations that I mentioned, compression, optimization of images, and in alignment of JavaScript and CSS files, you may use mod page speed, but don't use it as a replacement of the server level optimizations, because it just can't do that.
We have 2 questions left, which I think is perfect in terms of the time we have left as well. So final question number 1. Someone asked about Cloudflare. They said that they hadn't seen too much of a speed increase using Cloudflare. What have you seen?
Well, it depends. It depends on the website, and here is my advice for this client. I'm not sure if he's familiar with Firebug or the inspect element of Google Chrome, but sometimes there are some Joomla templates that load, for example, static resources such as images, but they load them through PHP scripts in order to resize the images. So if you have a thumbnail generator or something similar, then your static resources will be displayed on your website, but before they are displayed, they will be generated by a PHP script, and Cloudflare consider this as a non-static resource. And this means that if this happens, then you really need to check the settings of your template or extension to see if that's something enabled on your server. Other than that, it depends on the way Cloudflare is enabled. Usually, they require to point your www subdomain name to a CNAME record that is on their network. And if your static resources are not loaded through the www subdomain name, then these resources will be loaded directly from your origin server. It really depends. But if this participant of ours has time, feel free to send me an email with a link to your website, and I'll gladly check it and provide more information.
Cool. And the final question, is it possible to combine things like Rock Booster and JCH Optimize with your SUPERCACHER on the SiteGround servers?
Yes, you may combine JCH Optimize with our SUPERCACHER, and the only problem that I needed to resolve one time with the Rock module is that they use their own compression settings in the module, so sometimes their compression settings may violate some of the rules that we have for our reverse proxy setup. But that's not a problem, because if that happens, we can customize the rules, and after that the issue will be resolved. Other than that, I have not seen any major issues with such kind of setup.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Daniel. Do you mind flipping over to the final slide so we can see your email address?
It's daniel.k@siteground.com.
Well, wonderful. Thank you very much, Daniel.
And if someone is interested, that is my Twitter handler. So you may also ping me on Twitter if you have any questions.
So thanks, Daniel, and thanks to all the attendees today. Thank you very much indeed for coming, and hopefully we'll see you at another presentation later during Joomla 3 Day. Thanks, everyone.